Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Rallies today in the province's two largest cities to protest Alberta lifting COVID restrictions. Plus, an early morning fire at a popular pizza joint is under investigation. And dog owners have concerns about the risks associated with a certain type of grass growing in the city.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks for joining us. An early morning fire at a local pizza shop has been deemed suspicious. Fire crews were called out to two guys in a pizza place around 5 a.m. on Friday. Crews from 4 stations responded and were met with flames on the roof of the building and in the back alley. There were no injuries reported and no estimated damage figure has been released. Fire prevention officer and investigator with the fire department, Troy Hicks, confirmed to BCN that the fire is being deemed suspicious.
The origin and cause of this fire is still under investigation. Some samples were taken. It is, like I said, suspicious in nature. And so we're going to continue to assist Lethbridge Police Services and with anything that we can do and hopefully to find the cause of this fire. We have had a rash of, unfortunately, a rash of fires being started in a lot of alleys. 2 weeks ago, we had fires being started on 43rd Street. So once again, it's the same thing that too. Nowadays with people with cell phones and videos and cameras on their properties or their businesses, there's no such thing as something that's a ridiculous point to pass on to us. So if anyone ever sees something, whether it's in a case like this or these grass fires or alley fires, please reach out, let us know. There's no such thing as information that's not important. We could really use the help.
Anyone who may have seen the fire or have information is asked to contact LPS or the Fire Prevention Bureau at 403-320-3811. CP rail crews were busy Thursday evening after 3 train cars derailed in the Kip Yard near Colehurst. The derailment happened around 6:20 p.m. CP immediately responded with crews and equipment to the incident, which has since been resolved. There were no injuries and no public safety concerns. A petition has been started to remove foxtail weeds in the city of Lethbridge. The little weeds can cause quite the trouble for canine owners. As Micah Quinn explains, one dog owner says she wanted the city to get rid of the troublesome weeds after her dog was injured by them.
Good girl.
Haley Weinman and her dog Willow had just moved into the neighborhood of Gary Station in West Lethbridge when one day Willow came into the house gagging and choking. The dog had ingested some foxtail weeds, and she was rushed to the vet quickly after.
The vet actually told us we were the 4th case to come in that night, and they quoted us originally at almost $1,000, $980 I think it was. We ended up paying a bit less because it wasn't as serious of a case as they had expected. So we paid just over $500.
Staff from Park Pet Hospital told Bridge City News that if a dog ingests foxtail weeds, it can go into the tonsils in the mouth and get stuck in the nostrils.
So it can end up going further into the body if it's not addressed right away. It can even go into like the internal organs or even the brain if it's left for a long period of time. And then, like I said, it can go into the skin as well. So even a dog just walking can get it into their paw, and then that can lead to like an abscess or skin irritation, which then needs to be addressed.
Dennis Chinner lives in Paradise Canyon, and he says there's a huge problem with foxtail weeds in the area.
If I own a lot in the city and it's unsightly, I get a letter, right? So why doesn't the developer get a letter? Why doesn't the city maintain their own property? And that's the frustrating point to me as a taxpayer, is we blame it all on funding. Well, to me, it's not a funding issue.
The city of Lethbridge says they try to keep up on the removal of foxtail weeds on public property, but they are reminding residents on private property to remove the weeds themselves.
The interesting thing is, with the dry weather we've had, it's actually been able to outgrow the grass and stuff. So we're seeing it develop faster, and sometimes it's on places that we whippersnip and deal with in a different timely manner, set on the prioritization within the city. It gets a chance to develop more. So we've been missing a little bit of it. We keep working on trying to deal with the mature type of grass.
Weinman says this is a citywide problem, and the main goal of the petition is to create awareness so that another dog owner doesn't encounter the same situation she did. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Thank you, Micah. Another local business has joined forces with Connecting Our Community Lethbridge to collect for the Shoes for Kids YQL initiative. The medicine shop located on 20th Street South has set a goal to raise 100 pairs of shoes before August 14th. Shoes for Kids YQL recently announced they've increased their goal to 1,000 pairs after surpassing their original goal of 200.
And we never thought that the kids would need the shoes when they go back. Never had any idea of needing the shoes and backpacks. So now we made aware, and certainly it's a great initiative. And the great thing is local. So like every pair we will donate will go to the local kids. The way I look at it, it's kind of community's money, because what we make a profit is out of community, like the clients coming from the same community. So it's kind of communities giving back to community, not the business itself.
The medicine shop will also be a drop-off location if you'd like to drop off a pair. Their hours are Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 6 and Saturday from 10 till 2. Some exciting news was announced earlier this week for student athletes. Both Lethbridge College and the University of Lethbridge have released their fall 2021 athletic schedules. As Carson Marzouk reports, athletes and coaches are eager to get playing.
After a year of virtually no live sports, fans will be able to cheer on the Lethbridge College Kodiaks and the University of Lethbridge Pronghorns as early as September. Director of Pronghorn Athletics, Neil Langevin, says he feels the same excitement as the athletes ahead of the season.
Really looking forward to seeing what Pronghorn Athletics can do to help the community heal from the COVID pandemic.
Both organizations will have a limited season compared to normal. Practices will remain the same, but fewer games will be played. Across the river at Lethbridge College, coaches and staff are busy preparing for the fast approaching season. Manager of athletics Todd Coughlin says the student athletes have been resilient over the past year, and both him and the coaching staff are proud of their dedication to the sport.
It's a way of life. Athletics, when you're a collegiate athlete and you're a student athlete, you learn to balance, you know how to manage things. And so when something gets taken away from you, like being able to travel with your team and compete every weekend and represent the Kodiaks, that's a big hit.
Teams will begin to travel across the province to games, but new guidelines have been put in place by each conference. Fans will be allowed to cheer on their teams at both the college and university. Coughlin adds the coaching staff are just as eager to get going as the athletes.
We don't have any full-time coaches. They're all part-time, but they treat this job like a full-time position. But they want to participate just as bad as the student athletes.
A full list of the schedules can be found on each institution's website. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marzouk.
Thank you, Carson. Lethbridge College is joining forces with other post-secondaries to support Alberta's economic recovery. 7 of Alberta's colleges and polytechnics have signed a declaration to work together to advance agriculture and food research in Alberta. The declaration will see Lethbridge College, along with Grand Prairie Regional College, Lakeland College, Medicine Hat College, Nate Olds College, and SAIT work together to enhance agriculture and food research through the sharing of data, expertise, and research capabilities while supporting the evolution of policy and advocating for the industry. The United Nurses Union of Alberta has been making waves this week, carrying signs and trying to send a message to the provincial government about the 3% pay cuts, massive rollbacks, and loss of RN, RPN positions. Nurses organized a welcoming committee in Lethbridge for the Premier and Finance Minister's visit this week, and were also seen outside of the provincial building today. On their Facebook page, they wrote, quote, "Nurses want to be able to focus on providing the best and safest patient care, but that becomes harder to do when hospitals are constantly understaffed and the government is attacking and devaluing the work of nurses and healthcare workers," end quote. According to Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi, Alberta will be one of the first places in the world, if not the first, to allow people who are infected with COVID-19 to just go about their lives. Meanwhile, Alberta's health minister says ending isolation requirements for those who test positive for COVID was the idea of the province's chief medical health officer. Tyler Shandro says his United Conservative government is following Dr. Dina Hinshaw's advice as it moves to limit contact tracing and asymptomatic testing. The announcement comes as cases and infection rates in Alberta rise. Chandra acknowledges many in the medical community and beyond are concerned about moving forward so quickly, arguing it's the wrong move right now.
If we remember back in March of 2020, this is also something that Dr. Hinshaw spoke about even back at the beginning of the pandemic response, that the 3 stages of any pandemic begins with containment, and then we move to mitigation, and then it moves to the endemic response, where we live with a virus in our community. And this is now a virus that, as Dr. Hinshaw has said, is treatable by vaccines, or preventable, I should say, preventable by vaccines. And for her and the work that her office did to develop the milestone of 65% in second dose coverage, to moving to that recovery phase, that endemic phase in our response, was out of the work that she had done.
One organization with concerns about this is the Canadian Pediatric Society. The national organization says lifting public health measures while cases are increasing and vaccinations lag is an unnecessary and risky gamble. The society has written an open letter to the province's chief medical officer of health, urging her to reconsider the strategy. Dr. Dina Hinshaw announced earlier this week that isolation requirements would be ending for those who test positive for COVID or who have been in close contact with someone who has. Meanwhile, protests were held today in both Calgary and Edmonton against the province lifting its COVID restrictions. Many doctors in those cities say they're particularly unhappy that people diagnosed with COVID will no longer have to isolate beginning August 16th. Physicians fear this move could potentially cause more deaths. Rallies were planned for the noon hour today outside the legislature in Edmonton and the McDougall Centre in Calgary. Dr. Theresa Tam is warning we could see a 4th wave of the pandemic by the end of the summer if more people don't get vaccinated and provinces reopen too quickly. She's pointing to Alberta's decision to end asymptomatic testing as well as isolation requirements for those who test positive for the virus as decisions that could affect the rest of the country. The latest modeling says we could see a sharp climb in infections in younger people and unvaccinated people. Tam warns that it could cause a serious increase in case counts and hospitalization rates this fall and winter.
Of course, I firmly believe that quarantine and isolation can help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Especially in light of the spread of the Delta variant. And I believe Alberta is going to strongly recommend to cases to isolate. And absolutely, if the policy in Alberta is not to mandate that, then I would ask that any individual who is diagnosed with COVID-19 or you think you may have it, please isolate, please get your test, and inform your close contacts. And I think Alberta is not like all provinces are doing very well in trying to get their population vaccinated, but still has a ways to go.
Canada's Financial Intelligence Agency is helping to detect human trafficking in the sex trade by sifting through data from banks, casinos, and money service businesses. By looking at everything from hotel bills paid in cash to who bought escort service ads, FinTrack was able to disclose 979 packets of intelligence to police and other law enforcement agencies about suspected cases of sex trafficking in the past 5 years. Almost all of the files in Project Protect involved the exploitation of young women. Now, today is World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, as declared by the United Nations. Human trafficking is a growing and serious crime. Now, this might seem distant and unrelated to residents of southern Alberta, but as Jennifer Tribble of Not for Sale tells us, this crime is growing across our province.
Every single day we encounter organizations who are dealing with this hidden issue of human trafficking, and it's a reality that they are helping people work through every single day. If it's not on the sex trafficking end, it's the labor trafficking end. There's organizations in Calgary and Edmonton that this is a huge part of what they do, and these situations just keep coming up more and more.
Alberta's highest court has overturned the acquittal of a Calgary man who broke into the home of a professor and assaulted her while high on magic mushrooms. A lower court judge found Matthew Brown not guilty of 2 counts of break and enter, one with the intent to commit aggravated assault and the other to commit mischief, on the grounds that he was not in control of his own actions. The Alberta Court of Appeal has ruled that Brown's intoxication reduced but did not completely eliminate his criminal culpability. It concluded the former captain of Mount Royal University's men's hockey team is guilty of aggravated assault and ordered him back to trial for sentencing. Camrose RCMP are investigating the theft of a bell from a church tower in the community of Hay Lakes. The bell disappeared from the belfry of Exaltation of the Holy Cross Ukrainian Catholic Church sometime between July 19th and the 24th. The copper bell weighs more than 200 kilograms and is engraved with the name Shawaga. Saskatchewan has announced it's scaling back daily COVID-19 news releases to once a week after the coming long weekend. The province says the decision comes as COVID moves from a pandemic to endemic, which means it's always present in a certain population or region. It says it will continue to provide daily updates through its COVID dashboard. Today's release reported 52 new cases of COVID, pushing the number of active cases above 400 for the first time since July 8th. Saskatchewan's health minister is altering his remarks on whether people with COVID will have to self-isolate. Thursday morning, Paul Merriman said it was up to individuals to decide whether to shut themselves away if they are found to be infected with COVID. But later that afternoon, the health department released a statement saying anyone testing positive is directed to self-isolate immediately at home or in another suitable environment for at least 10 days. Merriman's statements come as the Alberta government faces heavy criticism for removing most of its public health measures for battling the disease. The federal government is under fire for not being adequately prepared to get Afghans who helped Canada during the war out of the country as the Taliban takes control of more and more territory. The email address Afghans were told to use to file their application forms as part of a fast-tracked resettlement plan crashed for several hours yesterday. In Fredericton this morning, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole told reporters that Canada owes a debt to the interpreters and others who are now fearing for their lives. For decades, Iran's rulers have committed great time and resources to the destruction of Israel. Over the years, cracks in support of the Islamic regime continue to grow, as Chris Mitchell of CBN News reports from Jerusalem. A group of Iranian expatriates visited Israel to talk about the historic friendship between these two countries going back to biblical times of King Cyrus.
These demonstrators in southwestern Iran are protesting the government's decision to limit their water supply. Several people have been killed, and more protests have spread throughout the country, calling for regime change.
As we heard on the streets of Iran, people were shouting against Iranian government. Israel is not our enemy, America is not our enemy, you are referring to Iranian regime are our enemy. People inside Iran, they realize who's their enemy, and they are trying to do their best to get rid of the Iranian regime.
While these protests continue inside the country, these Iranians, some of them Muslims, are showing support on their first visit to Israel. This group came with the Institute for Voices of Liberty, which is dedicated to encouraging democracy in Iran. Ellie Kohanim's family fled the republic when she was 5 years old.
They want to mark history. They are here to tell the people of Israel that they support them and they reject the Iranian regime's anti-Semitism and genocidal desire to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
In 1979, the revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini turned Iran from a pro-Western power to a country dedicated to destroying Israel and spreading its Islamic beliefs worldwide. These Iranians call the past 42 years an aberration in Iran's long history.
Unfortunately, this regime is at war with Iranian history, culture, civilization, and most importantly, Iranian values of tolerance and acceptance. We're here to make it very clear to the people of Israel that the Iranian people stand with the people of Israel and that we condemn the regime in Iran, which is an occupying force.
For the past year, the world has heard about the Abraham Accords. One of the goals of this mission is to let people know about what they call the Cyrus Accords.
Abraham Accords, of course, as everybody here knows, is a peace agreement between Israel and its Arab neighbors. We feel that just as that peace was hard to believe that it would happen, and it did happen, Cyrus Accords, a deal between Israel and a future free democratic Iran, is possible as well.
These accords are named after the Persian king who allowed the Jews to rebuild the Second Temple in Jerusalem.
That was Chris Mitchell with CBN News. Wildfire crews in BC's southern interior are preparing for possible lightning this weekend. The BC Wildfire Service says 242 wildfires are currently burning, down from about 300 last week. But heat warnings or special weather statements are now covering much of BC. So how's the weather looking locally? I will tell you right after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The heat warning is still in effect for southern Alberta, meaning that temperatures are going to be from 29 up to 35 degrees throughout southern Alberta for the next several days. Please do monitor yourself for heat exhaustion, heat stroke, especially if you are heading outside over this lovely long weekend. Looking into tomorrow, we're going to be seeing sunny and hazy conditions, high of 35. That is very warm. Even the evening temperatures staying up around, that's the low right there, 15 degrees. Temperatures looking more like 15 to 20 degrees overnight, so staying warm in the evening as well. 33 the high for Sunday, under sunny skies, 30 for Monday. Same thing for Tuesday, up to 31 on Wednesday, and rounding out that 7-day forecast at 29 degrees for next Thursday. There's also a slight chance of showers possibly on Monday night, so just something to keep in mind there. High average for this time of year, 26 degrees, certainly higher than that this weekend. 11 degrees the average low. 35 was our high temperature in 1939 on this day. We'll see if we can break that record tomorrow. 6 degrees was the low in 1954. Sun rose this morning just before 6 a.m. right at 5:58, and sunset this evening 9:18 p.m. More than 15 hours of daylight. Still lots of daylight out there, guys. Don't worry about it. Summer is still definitely here. 29 is the high in Victoria. Chance of showers. Heat warning in effect tomorrow for Vancouver, 25 degrees. That's that high pressure ridge still sitting on BC, increasing those temperatures for sure. Into Edmonton and Calgary tomorrow, sunny, hazy, 31 and 32 degrees in those cities. Same thing for Saskatoon, sunny, hazy, 31 degrees, sunny, hazy, 30 degrees in Regina. Winnipeg seeing a local smoke, so smoky conditions. They've got an air quality statement in effect for tomorrow, 28 degrees. The high as they get into their long weekend as well. Over in Toronto, 22 degrees, chance of showers, risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow. 22 for Ottawa, mix of sun and cloud. Sunshine in Montreal with a high of 22 degrees. Should be a pretty decent day over there. Over to the East Coast, as we look to Fredericton, chance of showers, high winds as well for most of these cities, up to 50 kilometers will be those wind gusts. In Fredericton and Halifax, 20 degrees the high. Halifax 19, 17 the high for Charlottetown. They have a rainy start to their long weekend for sure. 21 degrees in St. John's, Newfoundland with 5 millimeters of rain and up to 60 kilometers with the wind gusts. So there you go. That is your forecast. Have a very happy long weekend.
Today's weather is brought to you, rain or shine, by the Gym in the North. Top-notch equipment and customized classes in Lethbridge's North End.
The economy appears to have bounced back after its worst 2-month stretch since the start of the pandemic. Statistics Canada reports the economy eked out a gain of 0.7% in June and a growth of 2.5% in the second quarter of the year. During a stop in Hamilton this morning, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland said the government wants to ensure small businesses in particular have the support they need so the country can have a full and robust recovery. Now, with that, Stats Can estimating that the economy grew by an annual rate of 2.5% in the second quarter. It beat out the Bank of Canada's most recent expectations of 2%. The federal agency issued the preliminary estimate as it reported real gross domestic product declined by 0.3% in May, followed by a 0.5% drop in April. But that's offset by an estimated real GDP growth of 0.7% in June as pandemic restrictions started to ease across the country. StatsCan says that with the growth in June, total economic activity was about 1% below pandemic levels. And now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 24 points to 20,287. The Dow was down 149 to 34,935. The S&P 500 was down close to 24 points to 4,395. The Nasdaq was down 105 points to 14,672. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 33 cents to 73.95 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 15 cents to 3.91 US. Gold was down 13.98 to 18.14 US an ounce. Silver was down slightly to finish at $25.49 US an ounce. Wheat is at $405 per metric ton. Barley is at $405. Canola, $839. Corn is at $430 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 42 cents to 122.08. Feeder cattle were down 33 cents to 158.18. Lean hogs were down 10 cents to 106.20. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to finish at 80.19 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, the Canadian Pediatric Society says Alberta's plan to end all COVID isolation requirements could jeopardize the province's recovery and enhance viral spread. The national organization says lifting public health measures while cases are increasing and vaccinations lag is an unnecessary and risky gamble. Coming up, we speak with the interim leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party about his thoughts on what a sovereign Alberta would look like. But first, a quick break.
Alberta politics has been quite heated over the last year, with calls for Premier Jason Kenney to resign and for Alberta to even separate. Today we're joined by veteran politician Paul Hinman. He was the first leader of the original Wild Rose Party and also served as the MLA for Cardston Tabor Warner from 2004 to 2008. Paul is currently the interim leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta. Paul, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Hal.
First of all, tell us a bit about your party and why you feel that Alberta really needs a change in government.
Well, the NDP were a disaster and toxic for Alberta. The UCP have they've been traitors to us. That they haven't stood up and put Alberta's interests first. They've just basically been laid down to Ottawa. And we need a premier and a provincial government that actually understands the needs of the province of Alberta, our people, our industry, and it's just been a complete failure. We've gone from bad to worse. We have governments that are just spending is out of control, and people realize that we need a government that's actually going to protect their personal interests, their lives, their property, their freedoms, and this just isn't happening for Albertans, and we're really getting hurt bad by our government.
Now, a recent Angus Reid poll, Paul, says that among decided voters, 41% support the NDP, 30% for the UCP, and a surprising 20% for your party, for the Wild Rose. Did the poll results maybe surprise you a little bit?
The reception and the growth of our party has been phenomenal. And yes, I guess it bumped a little bit higher than we expected. But the bottom line, Albertans are tired of picking the lesser of two evils, and they're quite excited and jumping towards the Wild Rose Independence Party, and for good reason. We're there to put Albertans first, to protect their freedoms, their livelihood, their freedom of religion, and these other governments, just the personal and industrial attacks on Albertans is just unacceptable, and people are looking for a solution. And that's what the Wild Rose Independence Party is that they're here to actually to serve the people and not have the people servants of the government.
Now, let's break down the numbers actually for just a moment when you do the math here. According to that poll, many conservative-minded voters are likely thinking, this is going to just be a repeat of the election in 2015, splitting the vote on the right and the NDP going right up the middle and winning. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I would say it's not about splitting the vote. It's about not wasting your vote. And why would any Albertan want to waste their vote again on the UCP and I just want to say their betrayal of Albertans. And we absolutely know that the NDP was disastrous, the debt that they unloaded to us. They never fixed anything except for they put forward their personal agendas to the detriment of Alberta. I mean, look what they did to our oil and gas industry, and it's continued to be decimated. This idea of a social license. We have two governments that are bent on following Ottawa's divisive rules. They're rigged against Albertans, and they're not there for us. And so rather than, like I say, wasting a vote on the NDP or the UCP, people can actually vote for a party that they believe in, that know that's going to be there for Albertans and for freedom and for families and just the future for Alberta. These other parties have no interest in Alberta's future.
It appears as though your party, the Wildrose Independence Party, is gaining momentum here in Alberta. How many members do you have in your party right now?
Well, we're approaching 8,000 paid members. We're quite excited with the activity. And again, each week, the governments continue to hurt us. And like with Bill C-10 being passed on censorship, every time the governments do things, we see a boost. The lockdowns have been detrimental when they arrest pastors, when they shut down businesses. People are realizing that we've got to go somewhere else. And we just keep seeing the donations and the memberships ticking up week after week.
How many local constituency associations do you have so far?
Well, there's 87 in Alberta, and we have 50 of them, give or take a few, that are up and running, and we'll continue to bring them online as quick as we can, but it takes a little bit of work with COVID and not being able to meet with people. But we're like I say, we're approaching 50 if we haven't hit 50 this week. And we have a pipeline of CA people that are wanting to get up and running, and it's just been enjoyable to work with the different groups that are excited to be part of this movement.
Now, Paul, realistically, will you have a shot at having a candidate in each Alberta riding in 2023?
I'm very confident we will. You know, back in 2008, we were able to fill the slate. 2004, we filled the slate. And we think there's nothing more important than for every Albertan to be able to vote for something they believe in. And it's just that there's people stepping forward, there's great interest, and I'm very confident that we will have a full slate across all 87 constituencies here in Alberta.
Now, you believe that a sovereign Alberta is the only solution. How would you go about deciding this if you won the election?
Well, it's an excellent question. And, you know, when anybody ever wants to be independent and out on their own, there's steps that they need to take to do that. And to be an independent country, it's no different. The top two things that we would need to do is be first to create our own police force and judiciary system, that we'd have to, you know, have a patch over and to take control from the RCMP here for a provincial police force, one that has elected civilian oversight. Number two, we need to start collecting all of the taxes here in Alberta by Albertans for Albertans, and not sending our hard-earned dollars down to Ottawa and then putting our hand out asking even for lunch money to come back. It's been a complete black hole. We send $50 billion down to Ottawa and then we beg for money to come back, and that's just not acceptable anymore. You know, we create our own Alberta pension plan so people can have confidence in the future. We have our own employment insurance policy here, so that Albertans are supporting Albertans and not the rest of the country with their lax employment rules compared to ours. We'd actually govern ourselves with our own environmental legislation, and we'd actually, you know, continue to be able to promote Alberta industry, especially our oil and gas, which is just world renowned. I mean, we've set so many precedents when it comes to the good environmental regulations. Just all of those things have been cared for very carefully, and we're an example to the world, and the world needs more Alberta oil, not less, and we want to preserve that industry here. We'll protect it. We'll also look after our immigration policy, all of those things that will take those steps to exercise our full autonomy, so Albertans can have great confidence and say, oh wow, this really is working, this is wonderful, and have confidence to be able to then themselves voting in a referendum on sovereignty and not having politicians decide for them.
Now, Paul, you mentioned the energy sector for just a moment there, oil and gas sector. How would you actually get our products to Tidewater? That's a big concern, even with Premier Kenney discussing that.
Well, that's an excellent question. And as a member of Canada, we've seen very much that they're able to shut us down. That's one of the benefits of being a sovereign nation. International law does not allow countries to block other countries from exporting and getting their produce or bringing resources in from Tidewater. We'd actually be in a much better position, but not only that, the Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor, those Indigenous people are very anxious and wanting to deal and to get a corridor going through northern BC. And I just think that the opportunity would be exciting as a Wild Rose Independence government to be able to move forward on these issues and not be blocked anymore by our current federal government, who says we're not allowed to have that right, even though the Constitution says we have it. They have not allowed us to exercise that right here in Alberta. So it would be an actual plus, not a negative.
Have you had a chance to chat with Jay Hill, the interim leader of the Maverick Party, who wants to see the Western provinces join forces and separate?
Yes, and Jay, I haven't spoken to him recently, but he's always said, we need to try once more and to send MPs to vote no. The great benefit of the Maverick Party is bringing Western Canada together, and that's what we need to do. There's nothing more powerful than if Northern BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan were to come together and want to form a Western Canada that would be strong and free. That would be exciting, but we have to do it on the provincial levels, and so we just want to lead here with Alberta and then allow BC and Saskatchewan, maybe Manitoba wants to join us, certainly the territories. I just think it's an exciting opportunity to have a strong and free country, as opposed to one that's got the ball and shackles of Ottawa telling us what we can and can't do.
So, Paul, what are your thoughts on equalization payments? Has Alberta been giving too much, as Premier Kenney suggested?
Well, people always talk about equalization payments. The problem is that we pay too many taxes. Equalization is just a small part of it. And the amount of money that we send in taxes versus what we're represented and allowed to participate in, it's laughable. And so it's a lot more than just equalization. It's the taxation of Albertans. It's the regulations of Alberta industries. It's the shutting down of our pipelines and our opportunities to export our products. It's the attack on our beef industry and agriculture. All of those things are attacks from Ottawa. And equalization, that's what you want to say, the flavor that people like to talk about, but it's a lot bigger problem than just equalization.
Now, one of the complaints against the UCP is how it handled the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the issues you're concerned about is the extent of the restrictions, killing a lot of the small businesses and limiting religious freedom. Can you explain some of your concerns about the restrictions?
Absolutely. This is decimated so many lives. This government, who's supposed to be looking after the interest of the individuals and families and businesses, has only been interested in looking after their faulty healthcare system. Number one, they never ever compared and showed that, gosh, every year in the flu season our ICUs are maxed out. They created all this fear mongering like it was something new and unusual. And they didn't even allow for treatment. They canceled their own tests, I guess, if you want to say, like on ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine last July. They didn't pursue any answers. They just fell lock and step with the World Health Organization, which we know has not been in the best interest of people outside of China. And again, the way this government has picked and choose, what industries can be open. It's okay for hundreds and thousands of people to go to Costco and to Walmart, but we can't have 200 people attend a church. There was never anything scientific about this. This was just attack on people's individuals' business, their lives, their families, scaring children and saying they can't go to school, when there's overwhelming evidence that COVID was not a problem for children. It was a problem for seniors. It was a problem for seniors with preconditions. And yet they've blown this totally out of proportion. They always say follow the science when they themselves just go back and forth on it. And again, what's my biggest concern historically, the flu shot has been for seniors, and we'd allow them to pick and choose. And for Premier Kenney to say that we want 70% vaccination from those 12 years of age and up, this vaccine has not gone through the proper what would I say, the proper steps for safety that we do. This is being put out under the Emergency Act, and the efficacy and the safety of this shot has not been determined. But it is interesting that the information is finally coming out, and the WHO, just came out this week on Monday and says, you know what, we really shouldn't be giving this shot to children. This mRNA is scary stuff. It's unknown, it's experimental, and it's just unbelievable that we've set up a lottery here in the province encouraging people to be participating in this, and there's been no informed consent.
Paul, we only have a few moments left here. How would a Wildrose government have handled the COVID-19 pandemic differently?
Well, excellent question. And first of all, we should be creating a more robust healthcare system. I mean, we had the Butter Dome that was never used. There's no reason why we didn't increase, respiratory therapists and other things to prepare for it, especially for the second wave. But the most important thing is the government should be collecting all of the information out there and the best practices, and allowing doctors to pursue what they think is the right thing. This one thought central government censored decisions. I mean, I'm not sure if you heard about Dr. Francis Christian, who just got fired at the University of Saskatchewan because he was speaking out about vaccinating children. I mean, this is totalitarian, authoritarian thuggery, where academia and individuals' lives are being threatened if you don't go along with the government's dictates. And it's just unbelievable to me, the situation that we're in. And what government's job is to collect that information, disseminate it, and to allow professionals, whether it's doctors or nurses or whatever, to use their best judgment and their years of practice to actually be treating individuals. And this idea of the dog chasing its tail with those PCR tests, which we know had an inflated number of false positives to scare people. Everything the government did was about fear mongering and taking away people's hopes, scaring our children, saying, don't go visit your grandparents, you might be the one who kills them. Everything was backwards. When you listen to someone like Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond, who specializes and was an actual emergency act specialist, we've done everything wrong. You don't turn over the province and the economy to a doctor to shut everything down. And again, they didn't treat people as individuals. They just were treating numbers. All we ever heard time and time again was we need to protect our healthcare system, but they never increased the capacity, the robustness. We've been, our healthcare system has been overrun for 20 years. And yet, do we have more hospitals, more nurses? Do we have more facilities and treatments? No, we don't. And we spent billions of dollars and still have nothing to show for it. And it's the same with our senior care facilities. We should have been increasing those senior care facilities and creating isolation places. So many things that should have been done that weren't. And this government has no interest in Albertans or in their businesses. They only have interest in their healthcare system. And I want to say just a facade of virtue signaling, which has not been in the interest of Albertans.
Paul Hinman is the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta. Paul, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it again.
Well, there's so much discussion in our world today about racism, and recently an interesting claim in an article has been trying to get some traction that's denying evolution is a form of white supremacy. So joining us from Southern California to share the details is Dr. Fazl Rana, the Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. He is a biochemist and is the author of Thinking About Evolution. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rana.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so kind of you to bring me on.
Oh, absolutely. Now, can you explain where this idea comes from that denial of evolution is a form of white supremacy?
Yeah, well, as you pointed out, there was an article published just recently as an op-ed piece for Scientific American by Allison Hooper, where she made that very strong claim. But the fact of the matter is that over the years, organizations like the National Center for Science Education, which is an evolution advocacy group and an anti-creationist organization, has tried to establish an association between creationism and racism but they've never gone so far as to say that there is a direct correlation or a direct cause. And so this is, something that Allison Hooper has done that has really pushed things, I think, to the extreme.
Yeah, interesting. So is it true that biblical creation suggests a white Adam and Eve? I mean, we don't actually know their race or color of their skin, do we? Was that ever documented?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And the whole idea of again, creationism being connected with racism and white supremacy really stems back to the mid 1800s in the United States, when you had Christians who were pro-slavery trying to produce an apologetic justifying slavery based on the biblical text. And as part of that, they made the argument that people of dark skin either reflected the mark of Cain or the curse of Ham, with the idea that that people with dark skin were not favored by God, and that people with white skin were in a better standing with God, and that was used to justify slavery. Of course, at that time, there were also Christians who were abolitionists who countered that really flawed interpretation of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. But this idea sadly has persisted into the 20th century after the emancipation, and particularly in the South among fundamentalists and evangelicals. So this is where that association comes from. But as you're pointing out, the biblical text isn't that specific. It doesn't tell us anything about the physical appearance of Adam and Eve or Cain and Abel or any of the human beings that we encounter in Scripture, any of the characters we encounter in Scripture. The text is silent about their physical appearance. So any idea of where racial diversity comes from the biblical text is an inference at best.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying geographically and historically, the Bible actually doesn't say anything about, Adam and Eve's, what they actually first looked like, does it? That's an interesting point that you make. So did the author of this article consider the fact that there may very well be more non-white humans who believe in creationism rather, as compared to white people?
Again, a very strong point. I don't have the precise statistics in front of me, but there's about 2.3 billion people in the world that are Christians. This is about a third of the world's population. And I think it's safe to say roughly 2/3 of those people that identify with Christianity would be considered to be non-white. And of course, creation is a central doctrine in Christianity. And if that's the case, then you have a significant portion of the world's population, maybe 1.4, 1.5 billion people who are non-white, who would believe that God created human beings in his image. And so that's a creationist position. So just simply the population statistics, argue against the idea that creationism is a form of white supremacy. And by the way, just as an interesting aside, there's about 2 billion Muslims in the world, and Muslims are creationists as well. And many Muslims, again, would be considered non-white. So when you add Islam into the mix, there's a significant portion of the non-white world that would hold to some version of creation where there is an Adam and an Eve that all humanity comes from.
Very, very interesting point that you make there, Dr. Rana. Now, the article professes that the first wave of legal fights against the teaching of evolution were by the KKK. Therefore, affirming creationism devalues people of color. So on the other hand, you, Dr. Rana, believe that it's Darwinian evolution that minimizes the value of all humans, as where the biblical human origins model, it sort of elevates it. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes. And, it is true that the KKK was the first organization historically to oppose teaching evolution in the classroom. But the KKK had an interesting set of views where some of their ideas they bolstered from, again, this slave apologetics. But other ideas they were appropriating was from social Darwinism, where they saw essentially natural selection being the reason why white groups were superior to people of color. And to interfere with that would be to go against the natural order of things. And so the KKK had a really interesting amalgam of views. But what is missed in this article is that it's not just simply people that espouse creationism that held white supremacist views. So did evolutionary biologists who were part of human evolutionary anthropology. If you go back in the history of anthropology, all the way back to Darwin's book, The Descent of Man, you see Darwin espousing really white supremacist ideas, where he believed that the different racial groups were evidence that human beings evolved and that people of color were actually not as far evolved as white Europeans. And in fact, Darwin refers to non-white people groups as savages, where he argues that they were intellectually and morally inferior to white Europeans. They lacked self-command. And he even argues for British imperialism on the basis of the difference in, he saw, capabilities between different racial groups. Or if you continue, you have the ideas of Herbert Spencer and social Darwinism that, again, espoused a form of white supremacy. Or you look at Carlton Kuhn and his ideas of multi-regionalism and identifying not only different racial groups, but then ranking them based on skin color according to how far evolved he considered them to be, where again, of course, white Europeans were more evolved. So this idea of white supremacy is the issue, where you see people appropriating science or appropriating the biblical text to try to justify white supremacist views, whereas I think neither actually scientifically or biblically support those views. And it's really Christianity that views all human beings being made in God's image, coming from a historical Adam and Eve, that ultimately, I think, give you justification for seeing racial unity and racial harmony in the world.
Oh, that's interesting. By the way, what do we know about these white supremacists? Is there any evidence that the majority of them actually believe in creationism?
I really don't know the answer to that really good question. I'm not an expert by any means on the different white supremacist groups, but I would imagine that ultimately these groups are going to have to justify their beliefs in white supremacy based on probably some kind of amalgam of a distorted view of scripture and really a type of social Darwinism, where again, you would see the white race as being more evolved. So again, very similar to how the KKK would justify white supremacy. That would be my guess.
Mm-hmm. So for viewers who may doubt creation, are you able to share a few thoughts on some scientific, logical reasons why they maybe wouldn't believe in Darwinian evolution?
Well, I mean, the first thing that you see when you look at biological systems is this overwhelming appearance of design and design for a purpose. And of course, if something appears to be designed for a purpose, maybe indeed it has been. And so it's completely reasonable, I think, to look at biological systems and think that there is a mind, a creator that's responsible for those systems. But on top of that, there are certain aspects of evolutionary biology that are not well evidenced. For example, when we look at the key transitions in life's history, the origin of life, the origin of what are called eukaryotic cells, the origin of complex multicellularity in animals, and hence the origin of body plans, or the origin of consciousness, or even the origin of human exceptionalism. None of these areas have robust, valid evolutionary explanations. And in fact, the researchers that work in these areas will be the first to acknowledge we don't have an explanation for these important transitions. So to be skeptical of at least aspects of the evolutionary paradigm isn't unreasonable, and to see a creator's handiwork in the creation, again, is completely reasonable.
Interesting. Now, do you know if belief in creation is on the rise or on the decline in North America?
It's pretty much held steady over the last 40 or 50 years. I mean, today, I think the latest statistics I saw was about 40% of people would say that Adam and Eve were created in their, or human beings, I'm sorry, were created in their current form. They would hold to a historical Adam and Eve. About 35% of people say God used evolution as a way to create. So roughly 3/4 of the U.S. population hold to some version of creationism. And it's really about 25% of people that see evolution as unguided. And those numbers have largely remained constant over the last 40 years. Maybe about 40 years ago, the numbers would be slightly higher for people that espoused the view that humanity was created in its original form from a historical Adam and Eve. So it's a slight dip, but it's not that much of a change. So a significant part of the U.S. population holds to some version of creationism.
All right. Well, it looks like we're about out of time, but thank you so much for your time today and your opinions and your expertise on that, Dr. Rana.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. Dr. Fazal Rana is the Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe and is the author of Thinking About Evolution at www.reasons.org. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.